Good afternoon. Thank you for quieting down. Good afternoon and welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm Lauren Wright, Assistant Director in Interpretation here at the Art Institute of Chicago. It is my pleasure to welcome you to the museum and today's program, Gustave Caillebotte, Painting His World. This landmark exhibition reintroduces Gustave Caillebotte as a singular voice within Impressionism, an artist who turned his gaze inward, capturing the intimate world of his family, friends, and everyday encounters. Thank you for being here this afternoon for an exclusive look into the life and work of this singular artist. It is now my pleasure to introduce our presenter, Megan True, for an exclusive look into Gustave Caillebotte, Painting His World. Megan is the Curatorial Assistant in the Department of Painting and Sculpture of Europe. She earned degrees from Butler University and George Washington University, where she specialized in 19th century French art. She's previously held positions at the Indiana Museum of Art at Newfields, the Smithsonian National Portrait Gallery, and the Dallas Museum of Art. Megan will be starting a graduate program in the fall at the Courtauld Institute in London, England. We will miss her. We're grateful to recognize the John D. and Alexandra C. Nichols Family Foundation for their lead support of Gustave Caillebotte, Painting His World. Raymond James is the lead corporate sponsor. We thank them for their generous support. Now please join me in welcoming Megan to the stage.
Thank you. Welcome, everybody. We are so grateful to have you all here and to get to share a little bit more about this exhibition and this amazing artist. So this exhibition kind of began in 2022, and the impetus for it was two major acquisitions made by the Musée d'Orsay in Paris, as well as the J. Paul Getty Museum in Los Angeles. So in 2021, the Getty Museum acquired Young Man at His Window, one of the major Caillebotte works that has been held in a private collection for decades and was not often seen by the public. And likewise, in 2022, the Musée d'Orsay acquired one of Caillebotte's masterpieces, Boating Party, also from a private collection. So to celebrate these two major works being brought into public collections, the curators got together and decided to do an exhibition that highlighted Caillebotte. And based on these two major works, they decided that no one had before really focused on Caillebotte's figural paintings. And looking at the numbers, it was immediately obvious that his figural paintings featured primarily men, which was quite unusual for art at that time. And so they decided to create this exhibition to really explore why that may be. And we landed on an exhibition with the three of them. They approached our lovely chair of the Department of Painting and Sculpture of Europe, Gloria Groom, to request that we lend Paris Street Rainy Day. And Gloria said, well, we will give it to you if you let us tag on. So we were lucky enough to become the third venue of this amazing exhibition. And we are so happy to be bringing the work of Caillebotte back to Chicago. So as we were kind of developing this idea with the Getty and the Orsay, again, the focus was on Caillebotte's male sociability. He was very interested in kind of ideas of brotherhood, fraternity, and grew up primarily around men. And so that is kind of how we landed on the topics for the catalog, and a lot of the scholarly research that we conducted focused around that. So you will likely have noticed that the title for our exhibition here is slightly different than the catalogs and the titles in Paris and LA. And that is largely kind of a marketing decision on our museum's part. We wanted to make sure that this exhibition was tailored to the widest possible audience so that people could feel welcome to come and just really engage with this work. So the last time there was a major Caillebotte exhibition in Chicago was in 1995. so several decades ago, and that was one of the first retrospectives of the artist's work. Before this, he wasn't really a major part of the Impressionist canon. He was mostly known for his donation of his own collection of Impressionist art to the French state, which would later become the basis of the collection of the Musée d'Orsay, but not for his own art. And in the mid to late 20th century, he was finally reintroduced back into the canon, and Chicago's exhibition was a huge part of that. And so we're happy to kind of have this full circle moment of bringing his work back to Chicago to share it with the community. Now a little background on Caillebotte himself. He was born in 1848 in Paris and lived in Paris his entire life. His parents were Martial and Celeste Caillebotte. And Martial began as a manager at a textile manufacturing company and worked very hard to amass a fortune for the family. The textile company he also held stake in and was quite lucrative as they provided bedding for the French military. And after their contracts had ended, the company decided to sell the land the factory was located on. And on this land, they built many apartment buildings, several of which passed into Martial's ownership, and the passive income that he made as the owner of these properties allowed his sons to never have to work. They were set for life. And so that was the environment that Caillebotte and his brothers grew up in. Now, Caillebotte had one older half-brother, Alfred, who was a good 10 years older than him. He was from Martial's first marriage, and he was a prominent priest in Paris. But he had two younger brothers who were a huge part of his life, René, who was 3 years younger than Gustave, and Martial, who was 5 years younger. And family was incredibly important to him. And in his early work, he primarily painted his family in these interiors where you see the family kind of going about their daily lives. Now, because he had this independent wealth from his family, he was not required to sell his painting or market his painting to any sort of audience. So he was able to paint what was extremely personal and important to him as a person. And so, even more so than other Impressionists, his work really gives a window into his personal world. And so here we have a little scene of family mealtime with his mother and his brother René at the table being served by their long-standing butler, Jean Darel. And then a painting, the only portrait that he did of his mother, in 1877, only a year after his middle brother René's tragic death at just the age of 25. Now, René's death really impacted Caillebotte. It was an unexpected death. There wasn't much information on the death certificate other than that it was sudden. And after his brother's death, he took the initiative to write his first will at the age of just 28. And so this event in his life really made him stop and take stock and start to think about his own legacy. And he, again, was very focused on painting his family, and he painted two portraits of his brothers, Martial and René, that really kind of sum up their personalities. René, again, died young. He was a bit directionless, didn't quite know what he wanted to do with his life, and he's pictured here in a young man at his window, kind of just gazing lazily out at the street, perhaps watching the woman crossing the street down below. And Martial was also called to the arts. He attended the Paris Conservatory and would become a composer, and is pictured here diligently practicing his piano. And even this early painting kind of shows Gustave's interest in kind of playing with gender roles a bit. At the time, practicing piano wasn't an uncommon theme in painting, but it was typically seen as an activity for young women, a leisurely activity to kind of boost their skills. But here he shows his brother who trained very hard at the piano, and he considered it to be a kind of very diligent work. Now, the Caillebottes were wealthy enough that they were able to purchase a country estate in Yerres, which is a southern suburb of Paris. And it was here that Caillebotte really discovered his love for painting. And to start out, he actually studied law. He had a very strong education because of his family's social standing. But before he could begin practicing law, he enlisted in the French military and would fight in the Franco-Prussian War, which started in 1870. And by the time he left the army in 1871, once the war had concluded, he decided that he did not want to practice law and he wanted to pursue art as a career. And so he enrolled in the École des Beaux-Arts in Paris, which was one of the best art schools that you could go to. And he studied in the studio of the artist Léon Bonnat, who was a very traditional academic artist who was very popular at the Salon. So he had a very strong traditional background in art as he was starting out. And it was because of this property in Yerres that he really began experimenting with the Impressionist style. And so he was very interested in water sports as well. The country estate was located directly on the Yerres River. And so this allowed him to kind of discover this passion that he would carry with him throughout his life. And again, rowing was also a pretty common theme among the Impressionists. You can see Renoir's oarsmen at Chateau here, but they typically used it as a setting for bourgeois leisure activities. It was for well-dressed men and women who were coming to an activity where they could kind of safely interact and flirt. It was always quite flirtatious, but Caillebotte, you can already tell, wasn't quite interested in portraying that dynamic. In his one painting that you could kind of say is similar to the Impressionist themes, he has Boating Party here, where you see a man who has removed his frock coat but has kept his top hat on for some reason as he's rowing down this river. And even with this well-dressed man, you can tell that Caillebotte is very interested in the physicality of him rowing. The focus isn't on the atmosphere, the interactions, it is on his form as you can see him about to pull those oars back and the effort that it's taking him to do so. And it was quite unusual, this perspective as well. He places himself as the artist and you as the viewer as the passenger in this boat. And so he kind of leaves this question open as to who is sitting with this man. Is it a young woman? Is it a young man? How are they interacting? They seem comfortable, and this is a really good example of how he kind of begins to set up narratives in his painting without telling you exactly what to think. And going off of that physicality aspect of it, he was much more interested in the sporting aspect of rowing. So with other Impressionists, they typically depicted these large canoes that people would row on the river on, but he was more interested in these smaller vessels that were known as péressoirs, which comes from the French word to perish because they capsized so easily. And he found this very exciting. In Yerres, he was likely part of a small rowing club. Most of these paintings you'll see as you go through. The men are dressed in what appear to be uniforms and these short-sleeved white shirts with the blue pants and the very interesting straw rowing hats. But here you can also see that he has opportunities to begin experimenting with the Impressionist style. These are kind of some of his first forays into landscape a bit, and you can see that he's beginning to experiment with thicker, broader brushstrokes, more vibrant colors, really starting to kind of pull in those Impressionist elements to his own work. And up until this point, he had been relying quite heavily on his academic training. And so Floor Scrapers, which is one of the works that he is best known for now, was the first and only work that he attempted to submit to the official Paris Salon, which was a juried exhibition funded by the state government that was considered essential for artists to exhibit in if they wanted to have a true artistic career. Caillebotte created Floor Scrapers, which is, if you look at it, it's done in much a more realist style. It's a highly finished surface, but it was still considered too vulgar to be accepted into the salon, so it was soundly rejected, and he never attempted to exhibit there again. This drove him straight into Impressionism, which he embraced wholeheartedly once he had left the official system. And you can see in Floor Scrapers, even though it is a highly finished surface, it is more realist in style, you can already start to see his sympathies with the Impressionist movement. He isn't interested in creating these large history paintings or doing mythological scenes as were popular in more accepted circles at the time. He is interested in depicting everyday life and showing these kind of everyday moments with everyday people. And in particular, his choice to depict urban workers was quite rare. In realism, you see things like in Millet's painting, you see rural farm workers quite a bit, but until this time, you don't really see much of urban workers. And in this as well, you can really tell he is very interested in capturing effects of light, and the reflections on the surface of the floor are just absolutely gorgeous and what he is very focused on. And with this painting, he again is still really relying on his academic background. For this, he prepared extensively for the final composition. He created a number of oil sketches as well as pencil drawings, really trying to make sure that he was accurately portraying the workers' gestures and movements as they labored on the floor. And this space was extremely personal to him as well, because this room is actually a room in the family mansion that his father ordered to be converted into a studio for him. So it was a sign of how much his family was supporting his career. And although his father didn't live to see the studio finished or his art career develop, he was still extremely supportive of his son's pursuits. And even early in his career, he has a bent towards experimentation. And so in these two works here, House Painters and Pont de l'Europe, you can see that he is really interested in playing with perspective. And he is going out into the streets of Paris to try to find these kind of instances of extreme diagonals that he can incorporate into his work to kind of portray movement and just a bustling city street. And with his street scenes, for which he is very well known now, he is also trying to do something a little different. You can tell in instances like this secondary version of the Pont de l'Europe that he is interested in the newly popularized medium of photography. The cropping of this scene was incredibly unusual at the time. He actively has figures going out of frame. No one is facing the viewer. It's very tight, and this was quite unusual for the time. He really focuses on the modern aspects of this bridge. So the Pont de l'Europe was built in the 1850s to the 1860s, so Caillebotte would have grown up watching this bridge be built, and it was truly a sign of modernized Paris. It wasn't something that the citizens had ever kind of witnessed before, and Caillebotte was also quite interested in these kind of intersections of the city as areas where people from all walks of life would come and interact and pass through, and he was really interested in this dynamic. At this time as well, he is also working on some smaller, more impressionist paintings. At the same time that he's creating these very large, highly finished paintings, he is working and experimenting with a more impressionist mode. So here in the barracks of Pépinière and the Place Saint-Augustin, which are two views just down different streets of the Place Saint-Augustin in Paris, he is really interested in kind of capturing the atmosphere of the day. He's using much more broken brush strokes. These are at a much smaller scale that could have been painted en plein air. Up until this point, he was likely sketching outdoors, but was working primarily in a studio, so not quite in line with some of the other Impressionists at that point, but he was really starting to put himself out there and integrate these techniques into his own work. And our painting, of course, Paris Street Rainy Day, is his most ambitious and largest painting. He likely began creating this in 1876 after he first exhibited with the Impressionists. And by this point, he had embraced Impressionism wholeheartedly. By 1877, they were on the third Impressionist exhibition, and it is informally known as Caillebotte's exhibition because he came in and he took almost complete control of it. He picked the venue that they would be exhibiting in. He picked the works from the other artists that would be displayed. He even hung works himself. And this was very surprising to a lot of the art scene and artists at the time. He was often characterized as a millionaire who paints in his spare time. But he was extremely serious about his involvement in the Impressionist movement, and he had a very clear vision of what he wanted to see from the movement and how he wanted Impressionism to be perceived. And so he very much set up this exhibition to show off his own work advantageously. He chose other urban scenes to kind of place around his own, but definitely made Paris Street Rainy Day the star of the show. And with this painting, usually it is in Gallery 201 here on kind of that silvery grayish blue. And getting to see it travel to other venues and in other settings was very inspiring for us. We don't often get to see it in other settings and on other colors. And so in Paris, they had it on this kind of deeper blue that we at first anticipated it would look very good, and then we're a little surprised to get there and see that it actually flattened it out a little bit and had the opposite, where we were worried about it going on a deep red wall at the Getty, but when we got there, we really found that those warmer tones brought out a lot of depth in the painting, and so we kind of adapted our plans around that, where we were able to change some of our colors and ended up with putting it on this white wall kind of surrounded by a darker purplish red that we think really shows it in a new light. And it's really just amazing to kind of see how the painting shifts and what details you notice as it moves to different spaces. And we put a lot of thought into the colors that we used for this exhibition. Samantha Grassi, our designer, did an absolutely amazing job with picking out colors for this exhibition. We ended up with a lot of very deep, warmer purple tones and red tones that just bring out, again, so much depth in his work. And it's really just amazing to get to see it in different settings where you pick up on those different details. Now, in 1878, their mother, Celeste, passes away, and it is only Gustave and Martial left. And so they end up selling the family mansion and the estate in Yerres, and they move to an apartment on the Boulevard Haussmann near the newly constructed Garnier Opera, which was a very fashionable address for two young bachelors. And they had a very spacious, luxurious apartment with this continuous balcony that ran all along the sides of their apartment, which were very new to Paris. These were the new standardized buildings that you think of when you think of Paris, of these cream stone buildings with the kind of elaborate ironwork balconies. And Caillebotte really used the balcony as an extension of his home. He would invite his friends out there to observe the city, because it's at this point that he really withdraws from the street. Before, he's always painting kind of on eye level with the street. At this point, he retreats a bit and is still interested in depicting Paris, but from a brand new perspective from above. And this leads to some of his most radical compositions. So he is creating scenes like Boulevard Scene from Above, where he is kind of almost getting into true abstraction in some places, and it's very radical even for the Impressionists at that time, and was seen as very, very innovative. And also around the 1880s is when he is shifting a lot more into exclusively figural work. And so he also begins to experiment with some genre scenes or scenes just from everyday life, and he never hired models. He only used people that he knew, friends, acquaintances, and it's very interesting to see him take people that he knows very well and pose in these sort of staged scenes. So the man that you see in both of these paintings here is identified as one of his best friends, Richard Gallo. He appears in more Caillebotte paintings than any other friend of his, and he was a confirmed bachelor his entire life. He never married, and we are not sure who the woman is, but we do know that she was likely an acquaintance of Caillebotte's, and he uses them to kind of create these slightly dissonant scenes of domestic life. And it really is a great sign here of how willing he is to play with gender roles in his art. So particularly in Interior Woman Reading, he reverses the roles in so many ways. So you see this woman, very large in the foreground, kind of looming over the teeny tiny man in the background. This difference in scale was very jarring to people, but it's something that Caillebotte liked to experiment with a lot, kind of stretching and compressing space as he painted. And when he displayed both of these in the Impressionist exhibitions, and one critic said that with such a difference in scale, divorce is inevitable. So really kind of playing with these different sorts of relationships. But she is large, up front, upright, in this wooden chair, reading a newspaper, which at the time was considered to be a very masculine activity. And in the background, the man is lounging on the sofa, reading a novel, both of which were seen as very feminine. So he's really willing to kind of reverse these roles and be playful in his narratives. And in his work, especially obviously his figure work, he is very interested in accurately portraying fashion and using clothing and accessories to really individualize his figures and indicate their class status, job, different aspects about them. And a big indicator of these things in the 19th century were hats. And so Gloria had the brilliant idea to kind of bring in these examples of historical hats that you can see throughout Caillebotte's painting at the time. He uses the derby to kind of indicate upward class mobility. The top hat indicated upper class bourgeois men. He has a yachting cap because he was a sailor, the French military kepi. And of course, that very strange helmet-like straw hat that we searched and searched and searched and could not find a single example of. And we were lucky enough to have a contact, an artist and milliner who works at the school here, who was able to create this beautiful facsimile for us. So that's very special. She just happened to have 19th century straw braid already in her workshop. So really it was quite fortuitous, and we're very happy to have that. It's a little special aspect there. Now, again, he really focused on the people that he knew and loved for his portraiture. He didn't take commissions. He didn't paint strangers. He only painted people who were close to him. And of course, some people show up a lot throughout his paintings, particularly Richard Gallo, who we saw earlier. He shows up in the background of several paintings and somehow always looks a little uncomfortable, even though he poses for Caillebotte quite often. And a huge part of the research that we completed for this exhibition was kind of digging into the biographies of his sitters. They weren't identified in a couple of paintings, and we really didn't know much about a lot of them. And so through our research, we were able to kind of fill out their stories, how they knew Caillebotte, and also were able to get a lot of just fantastic photographs that are from the family archives. We were very lucky to have the family, the descendants of his younger brother Martial, working with us. They still own quite a bit of his work. And we were able to kind of really show how he was portraying them. So this is one of his maternal relatives, Eugène Dauphren, who was a relative of his mother's and visited him and Martial very often after the death of their mother, and was also a large collector of Caillebotte's work. And then this is one of his distant cousins, Henri Cordier. And this is a great example of how at times he very much wants to individualize these portraits and use the settings to really convey who this person was. So Cordier was one of the foremost French experts on Chinese language and culture at the time, and he worked at the École des Langues Orientales in Paris, and was a prolific author. And so in this portrait, he is pictured in his office, kind of awkwardly kneeling at his desk as he just feverishly writes something down. And then also one of the more interesting discoveries we made was that in a couple of unidentified portraits, including this portrait of a man from Cleveland and the earlier In a Cafe, the model was his good friend Albert Courtier, who was a childhood friend and also Caillebotte's notary, who took control of both of his wills and was pivotal in helping to distribute his estate after his death. And then this is also a fun one. We were able to identify Paul Hugo, another very close friend of Caillebotte's, who was also a collector of his work. He really supported his friend's career. And we love this photograph because he happens to be wearing almost the exact same outfit as he is in the painting. He's got that nice little polka dot waistcoat on. And you can tell Caillebotte really paid attention to every aspect of his friend's dress. And then here, Jules Richemond, another childhood friend, and again, just really showing how accurately he was portraying these people. And in a lot of these, you can see that they are set in Caillebotte's own home. So he's bringing these people in to sit for him, and they're just hanging out as he paints them. You can tell a lot of these elements show up again and again in these portraits, the silvery blue walls in the background, the gilt boiserie molding, even the red chair you see in his portrait of Albert Courtier as well. And so he is always inviting these men into a space where he's very comfortable. And so as we were going through, we knew we wanted the exhibition to be largely chronological, to really show the development of his art and his style. And so we have this design where you're moving through the different periods of his life and then spiraling in to this central room where we have the nudes. These are extremely important in Caillebotte's body of work. He only painted 3 nudes throughout the span of his career, which was a little odd. That was often a pivotal part of an artist's development. It's learning anatomy. But these are both very radical for a lot of reasons. So at the time, painting nude women was extremely common throughout art history. You often see, especially odalisques of women kind of lounging on these couches and divans. It was a common theme, but usually they were in history paintings, mythological settings where they were at a bit of a remove from the audience. But here, he really puts you in this immediate, vulnerable moment where she has just undressed, her clothes are discarded right behind her, and you can tell that she has very recently undressed because you can even see the line from her corset still imprinted on her waist. And so she isn't just magically naked. She has discarded her clothing for a reason and is now laying very vulnerably on this couch, not looking at the viewer, with her hand over her eyes. And it was a very interesting new variation on this theme. And of course, Man at His Bath is one of Caillebotte's most interesting works. It was not unheard of to have male nudes. They were fairly common, but again, mostly in history paintings, mythological settings, meant to really show the strength of the male form, showing them off in kind of heroic poses. But this scene where he is just gotten out of the bath is vulnerable and intimate in a way that was not common at all at the time. So you can really see that he has taken so much care to portray the back of this man and is focused a lot on the details of the musculature throughout the back, the buttocks, the legs, as through very, very close looking. It's very intimate. There's a sensuality to it that has led to a lot of guessing about what Caillebotte was kind of doing in this situation, and the focus is on him entirely. And towards the end of his career, he moves away from exhibiting. He has butted heads with Edgar Degas one too many times during the Impressionist exhibitions, and has decided that it's not his priority anymore. So he moves to a new country estate that he had purchased with his brother around 1887 when his younger brother marries. And this property was very special to him for a lot of reasons, but mostly because it was on the River Seine, up in a northern suburb of Paris, very close to the headquarters of the Cercle de la Voie de Paris, which was a sailing club that he was super involved in. And it's at this point that he really begins to focus more on his other interests, including gardening. He had a very large flower garden and greenhouse, and particularly sailing. He not only raced yachts in competitions, but also designed them himself and had them built on a shipyard on his property. And this boat in a boat race is one of his more well-known boats that won quite a few races, cheekily named Roast Beef, in English too, which is really interesting. He definitely had a sense of humor when naming his boats. And he made a lot of really good friends as he moved out of the city. This is Eugène Lamy, a fellow sailor and a local shoemaker, really showing that he was interested in interacting with people, men in particular, from all walks of life. And this period was really, really even more personal to him. At this point, he's only painting for himself, and he has really fully embraced the Impressionist style at this point. His brushstrokes are really loose, his colors get even more vibrant. He has kind of reached that point in his artistic development and is painting these very personal scenes. These two young boys in the decorative arched painting are Eugène Lamy's sons, and he painted this specifically for his younger brother Martial to decorate his apartment. And he is really, really embracing the Impressionist style. And he is best known for his collection, which he later donated to the French state after his death in 1894. He likely died of a stroke just at the age of 45. And so it's incredible to kind of think what his career may have been if it hadn't been cut so short. But following his death, his younger brother Martial and Renoir, his good friend, were able to get at least some of his art collection accepted into the French state museums. And unfortunately, that long overshadowed his own art. But now finally, he has been reintroduced into the Impressionist canon and is remembered for his pivotal contributions to Impressionism as well. Thank you very much.